friends. How are you today? Boy, oh boy, is it hot where GiGi lives. Can you see that fan reflected in my mirror? It's very, 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 very hot outside. But I want to ask you a question. When you read a book, where do you start? GiGi reads a magazine from the back page first. Isn't that funny? I don't even know why. I've done it all my life. I start at the back and work my way forward. But when I read a book, I start in the front. Today, we're going to start reading from GiGi's book called In the Beginning. Hang on, we will be right back. Hi, welcome to GiGi's place. I'm so glad you came. Come on in, let's have some fun. Hi, welcome back. So, maybe you noticed that I'm dressed up just a little bit. And that's because GiGi's just come from a funeral. Do you know what a funeral is? Well, it's not a beginning, it's kind of an end. Remember several weeks back I told you that I have a friend whose husband went to heaven very suddenly? Well, today was the funeral. That's like a church service where you say an official goodbye to someone, and GiGi was there to sing a song. And so I came back from that service to talk to you about this book. Now, I have to have my glasses to read, and I'm just going to read you a couple of chapters today, and maybe we might have to do some this week and some next week because we can't have it too long. I'm also going to tell you a lot about my cats. On the cover of this book, can you see these two guys right here? This one is Shakespeare, this one is Dickens. Oh, and by the way, did you notice GiGi's fingernails? They're all different colors, aren't they? I told my nail lady I couldn't decide what color I wanted, so we just did every finger a different color. Okay, are you ready to start at the beginning? Here we go. I'm going to sound like a teacher now. Shakespeare was trying so very hard to sleep. He kept hearing clicking or tapping noises, and he didn't want to wake up to explore. He kept thinking to himself it had to be either water dripping in the sink or that pesky bird again outside tapping on the window. Although annoying, neither of those choices merited him totally waking up to investigate. His whiskers twitched, and he kept changing positions. Finally, he could stand it no longer, and he opened one sleepy green eye. Across the room from where he slept sat his brother, busily typing away on their mom's laptop. Angrily, oh, so angrily, Shakespeare growled through clenched teeth. "Dickens, what in the world are you doing?" "I'm trying to sleep here." Dickens looked hurt. "I'm working on your story, brother. Listen to what I've got so far." Shakespeare slowly began the process of moving from a trying to sleep position to a now what has he done position so he could focus on his brother. Dickens cleared his throat and he began reading in his annoyingly nasal, monotone voice. "It was a dark and stormy night. One of those nights when no matter how many times Mom or Dad come into the room to look under the bed to prove there are no monsters, a child can still hear them in the closets, behind the door, in the attic, even outside the window." The tapping and droning continued, for Dickens was quite adept at composing and typing at the same time. The tapper was unaware that a storm was developing on the other side of the room. Once more, Mom or Dad would come in, turn on the lights, look around and say, "See, there's nothing here. It's just the wind. Now go to sleep." And then they'd be gone. And the child, left in the dark with them, the antsy-pantsy snigs, or the crummity-dummity-diggles, or even worse, the quirtsy-sniggly-doo-dums. At that, the brewing storm erupted into volcanic proportions. "Okay, that is enough, Dickens. What's the matter with you?" Shakespeare had been sitting quietly, perched beside the computer screen, listening ever so carefully to what was being read. But now he reached his long furry paw out and boxed his brother's ears. His brother did not take very kindly to that in the least. Shakespeare continued, I never ever said anything about moms, dads, beds, monsters, or whatever else in the world you're talking about. I'm setting the scene, dude, Dickens replied a bit defensively. I'm coloring the tone. I'm laying the groundwork. I'm casting the mood for your, dare I say the word, tale. He felt, you see, that this was some of his best work. He sat massaging his stinging ears with his paws, looking quite forlorn. Shakespeare's always trying to make me feel stupid, he thought angrily. Now, before this brotherly spat erupts into epic proportions, let's clear the air, shall we? I think I might be able to hear what you, faithful reader, are thinking at this point. Shall I venture a guess? Aha! Whoa! Wait a minute. Dickens, Shakespeare, whiskers, paws, laptop? You're confused, aren't you? Yes, well, let's see. How does one explain Shakespeare, Dickens, and a computer in the same time frame? For want of a better idea, let's just start at the beginning, shall we? We have to start with Miss Mattie Davis, an English teacher on assignment in a faraway land. Miss Mattie was a great reader who loved collecting things. Cookbooks, she was a fabulous cook. Crystal candle holders, teapots, and books, mysteries, classics, and history. But she confessed to some other addictions too, like chocolate, watches. She had over 20. Leather wallets. She couldn't begin to remember how many she had. And lots of silver bracelets. Miss Mattie was a tall, no, make that a very tall woman with long curly brown hair and enormous blue eyes. She loved wearing bright colors and lots of jewelry. On her right arm, she wore bracelets that she'd collected from the countries she visited. Sometimes she'd use more than 10 at a time. Sometimes one or more broke, got lost, or most probably she gave it away, making the average total about 7 that she'd wear at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Miss Mattie was also a witty lady with lots of friends. As mentioned before, she was very tall, which made life in this present country a bit difficult, as she was at least a foot or more taller than the general public. Her feet always hung off the beds, no matter where she was, and over the edge of her small love seat when she stretched out to read. But since she lived alone, it was no problem most times. When Miss Mattie moved far away from home and her family and into this particular flat, for that's what apartments were called in this country, she kept busy at her job. She was a teacher, and with her social life. But in her home, she grew lonely and began to search for a pet to keep her company. She wanted no dogs, though, because they have to be walked, and their barking might disturb the neighbors. After a while, Miss Mattie heard about a tiny kitten she thought would be perfect. One evening in an underground train station, Miss Mattie met her friend Doris, who was carrying a noisy cardboard shoebox. In it was a howling little kitty that a roommate had adopted, but couldn't keep because someone else in her flat was allergic to cats. It fell to Doris to get rid of that little allergen. Even at that tender age, this kitten seemed quite indignant at the rough and shoddy treatment he felt was being meted out to him. He set up a loud protest that could be heard by most of the passerby on the busy train. Both Doris and Miss Mattie were worried about being arrested for animal cruelty, so they decided it best for Miss Mattie to get him home as quickly as possible. The most direct and the fastest way to her flat was by the underground train. So, since she was right next to the station, Miss Mattie thought this to be the best option. She ducked into the station, used her pass to get through the gate, and waited for the next train going in her direction. She had to ignore the stares of the fellow train travelers who were curious about the wiggling, howling box she was carrying. Animals are not allowed on the subway train, apart from guide dogs. But Miss Mattie really had no other way to get home in a hurry, so in the end, she was carrying a concealed kitten. She tried to look as though nothing was out of the ordinary, in spite of all the howling, spitting, and hissing coming from inside the box. But my, how the people stared at her. She sat silently praying that the conductor would not come along and put her and the baby kitten off the train. Thankfully, no such misadventure occurred, and in due time, Miss Mattie and her mysterious box were in the elevator of her building. By the way, those howls of protest really sounded lion-like in the elevator. Once inside her flat, Miss Mattie put the box on the floor and loosened the lid just a bit. What happened next reminded her of a Jack-in-the-Box toy as the top flew open and out sprang a black and white ball of very angry kitten fur. Despite this initial transport, the kitten grew into a stately older cat who somehow still had a curious attraction to boxes. If there were a box inside, rest assured the cat would find a way to get into it and hide. In her home country, Miss Mattie had lots of cats, and they were all named for characters or authors connected to her favorite works of literature. She had a female named Guinevere, and 3 males named Chaucer, Percy, and Emerson. From her first look at the new kitten, Miss Mattie had decided she was going to call the kitten Poirot, after the famous Belgian detective in Agatha Christie's mystery books. After all, he did have a tiny little half mustache. But the little scamp soon showed her that he had his own ideas of what his name should be. For you see, he developed a sort of addiction to her pens. Indeed, no pen was safe from his clutches, though he didn't seem to care much for pencils. One wonders why. If Miss Mattie left a red marking pen on the table when she went to get another cup of tea, she had to conduct a full-scale search for that same pen when she returned. If she found it, it was often underneath the sofa, or sometimes in a completely different room. The kitten also had a rather peculiar fondness for perching on books in his early days. Whenever he found a book left open, the kitten could not rest until he had scampered across the room, leapt up onto the table or chair, and plopped down on the book. What was it? The smell of the ink? The feel of the paper? The subject matter? No one really knew the answer. Perhaps he was simply resting. Whatever the reason, this odd little fellow seemed to have indicated his name must be something more aligned with pen and paper. Writing, for sure. And so at last, he was named after the great author, poet, and literary master of words, William Shakespeare. Another early quirk of Shakespeare's that he never quite outgrew was a passion for feet and shoes. When just a tiny kitten, he would stalk Miss Mattie's feet if he ever found them propped up on a sofa or a table. Of course, when he leapt high in the air to attack, those needle-sharp claws found their way into her tender feet, which meant Shakespeare would find himself sailing through the air towards whatever piece of furniture was in the line of fire. Somehow, that rude treatment never seemed to deter him from his next adventure with feet, however much trouble it caused him. When Miss Mattie's students came to visit, the first thing they'd do when entering her flat was remove their shoes. Soon after, very soon, all the visitors were surprised to find a tiny kitten, and in later years, a very supersized adult cat, sniffing around their shoes. Sometimes he would even get inside the shoes and peek out at them comically. He was definitely full of surprises and always seemed to know instinctively which people were afraid of cats, which were allergic to them, or even better, which were wearing black clothes.
Well, it's been another busy day of filming here at Gigi's place. Mom's kicked her shoes off. There's books all over the place. And my silly brother Perkins is trying to pick a fight with me. Hey, but we loved having you watch us. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment box below. And come back and see us on Gigi's Place. Bye.